I'm asked to speak this year about the broken state and how to fix it. Well, it occurs to me, for starters, there really is no such thing as the state, is there? It's something we pretend about. This is an artificial construct. There isn't a state. I've never met the state. I've never had occasion to shake hands with the state. What is this state thing? I think we ought to think about it differently. What's the state? It's some people bossing other people around, right? There are bosses, and as Doug Casey said, there are whip dogs. That's really what it's about. And I concede that my topic may not be for everyone. You may be one of the bosses. Therefore, you may not perceive anything is wrong. The state is not broken. You like things the way they are. I think our first mistake is to assume that everybody wants to fix things. That's just not true. What are you going to tell President Barack Obama? He would do better in a free society? No, he's not going to do better in a free society. I've had occasion on many times sitting privately and off the record to talk to DEA agents. I always say to them, hey man, how's this drug war thing going? We going to win anytime soon? We getting close? Got any fresh new ideas? And they chuckle just like you did. They laugh. They don't want to engage. You know what they say? It's a job. It's my job. Well, am I going to talk to them about the economics of the drug war and how we'd be better off getting things out of the black? They don't care about the black market. They like it, right? They're part of the issue. They don't perceive things broken. They like it the way things are. I always say in Maricopa County, Arizona, where I'm from, who likes this drug war? Sheriff Joe Arpaio, right? Who benefits from the drug war? I always try to explain to people, if you like the drug war, who are you helping? The drug dealers. They like things the way they are. So first thing to figure out is, do you even want to fix this? So I would suggest I'm only talking today to people who aren't the bosses, the lead dogs, I think, as Doug Casey just talked about. I'm talking about the people who really would do better in a free society, and that's most people. Or those lead dogs who have some moral compass and understand that, you know, maybe a free society is better. It's just more moral. So those are the people I'm talking to. And my first thought, where do we start by fixing this thing? Look in the mirror. Fix yourself. Are you part of the problem? You may be. I don't know all of you, but I would venture a guess that many of you are indeed part of the problem. Nobody thinks they're part of the problem, but I'm sure some of you are part of the problem, at least in my opinion. And what is the problem? To me, the problem is simple. All this other stuff, who's in office, what gets passed, forget that stuff. If you want a free society, the problem is we don't have enough people whose hearts and minds are pro-freedom. We don't need everybody, but we need more than we have. You know, I think about the American Revolution. Everybody wasn't for revolution. I don't know, I wasn't there then. You'd have to ask John McCain from Arizona. But you know, there are estimates that maybe 10% of the people were for revolution, 10% were loyal to the crown, and 80% just said, hey, tell me what flag to fly in the morning. They didn't really care. I don't think much has changed, incidentally. We need to get our 10%, or maybe just a bit more. So what do I mean by pro-freedom, right? Because I know, I give enough talks. I could speak to any group. Raise your hand if you're for freedom and liberty. Everybody, right? Everybody's for freedom and liberty. You can go to any group and ask that question. I wrote an article where I took some quotes from Saddam Hussein and Hitler. They made speeches that had statements in them that sound great. I listened to President Barack Obama give a speech, and man, he sounds pretty good, right? He sounds like he's for freedom. What does that mean to be for freedom? Well, as Doug explained, and he stole a little bit of my thunder here today, here's how I see things. You know, if you're a human being and you're interacting with another human being, there are only two possibilities to that interaction. It's either a voluntary interaction or it's a coercive interaction. You tell me that there's an interaction, give me the details about it, and I'll tell you my opinion about which box it's in. And all we're saying is, those interactions that are in the voluntary box, you don't have to like them. Those ought to be legal. That's all. Shouldn't have to go to jail for a voluntary interaction with another adult. That's really all we're saying. Another way to say it, to express it, is thou shalt not initiate force. People who agree with that, yeah, you're pro-freedom. Had a discussion last night at dinner with a new friend of mine who I'm sure is here, and I asked him, we were talking about whether he was libertarian or not. He said, I'm mostly libertarian, and my response to that was, well, so under what circumstances do you think it's okay to initiate force against your other human beings? Which occasion do you think it's okay for you to be an aggressor? That's what I mean. Another way to say it is live and let live. Or let other people do whatever they want so long as they're peaceful. If you're in that crowd, you're pro-freedom. And I'm here to talk to you. So here's my first question. Are you really for freedom, or are you pretend for freedom? I mean, to the extent you support the rights of other people to do the same things that you yourself do, big deal. That's a big zero on the freedom scale, right? Well, you drink alcohol, so you think alcohol should be legal. You smoke marijuana, so you think marijuana ought to be legal. You're gay, and you have a gay partner, and you think gay marriage ought to be legal. You like guns, and you're for gun rights. Big deal. That's a zero on the freedom scale. That doesn't tell me anything about what's going on in your head. What I want to know is, do you support the rights of other people to peacefully do things that you would never do, that you're totally against, you morally oppose, you think are unwise, unhealthy, immoral, but are peaceful nonetheless? Can you say that? If you can say that, now you're a big boy of freedom. You're part of the solution. You understand what it means to be for freedom. To you, I would say, let's work together. And in the spirit of working together, there are just some things that come to my mind that we need to talk about if we're going to fix this situation. And I'm optimistic. As those of you who heard my talk last year, there's a good case for pessimism, no doubt. There's also a case for optimism, and that's a choice, right? We choose whether we're going to be optimistic or pessimistic. So there are just some concepts. First off, freedom is important. It's not just a convenience. It's critical. We need to treat it like that. It's not a luxury. It's something we require as humans. You know, money is important. And I don't want to downplay how important money is. I'm a capitalist. I think people ought to earn as much money as they can peacefully earn and spend it however they want. Money's important. But money's not the most important thing. Freedom is much more important than money. If you don't believe that, I wish you could talk to some of my clients. I do major felony cases. People come into my office, and when they're at risk of losing their freedom, I can promise you money is not the issue. They will spend whatever it takes if they think they have a better chance of preserving their freedom. Freedom's that important. If you don't realize it, you probably haven't been at risk of losing it. If you are at risk of losing it sometime, you'll understand it like that. There are other things, incidentally, more important than money. Just as a side note, your health is more important than money. I think your integrity is more important than money. Do you have integrity? Don't say you're for freedom if you're really not. Have integrity. If you say you're for freedom, really be for freedom. Also, I hope you've learned already, if you've been on the planet any length of time, the quality of your relationships with other human beings is more important than money. Spend some time winning hearts and minds. We don't have to agree on every little thing. I think that people who are pro-freedom get into these horrible arguments with each other because they're having misunderstandings, miscommunications. And what I see more common than any other situation is people who are for freedom confusing two different discussions. One discussion, how would things work in a free society? Doug Casey says we should do away with the SEC and the FDA and all these, and I agree with him, of course. But how would things work without those organizations? Things would work just fine, incidentally, and we need to talk about that. Do we want a free society, and how would things work? That's one discussion. A completely different discussion is, given that we currently live in a tyrannical police state, what do we do to try to move towards a free society, right? I see pro-freedom people get into arguments about things like Social Security all the time. For example, one person might say, well, here's how I think we ought to get out of Social Security. Let's do this, that, and the next thing. And someone else says, well, we shouldn't have the government running retirement. And they get into a fight about this. They're having different discussions. It may well be that both of them agree the government shouldn't run your retirement program, but one of them is having a discussion that goes like, given the fact that some people have paid into it their entire lives and now rely on it, isn't there something that we should do to get them out? And there are different opinions. That's a different discussion. We should be aware of that. What I'm most concerned about is figuring out first, are you actually for a free society? And remember something, freedom's defended at the edges. That's where it's defended, right? The First Amendment, free speech, we're all for that. There's no issue with free speech when somebody says something that's in the mainstream. That's not the time to stand up and say, yay, look at me, I'm for free speech. You want to be for free speech? Identify something somebody said that's on the fringe. And even better, something you completely disagree with. Who do I want to defend in free speech cases? Lunatic white supremacists, racists, other idiots who say stupid things, who have ridiculous positions on things. That's where freedom is defended. You want to defend the First Amendment, that's where you defend it. Same is right for the Fourth Amendment. That's my backyard. That's where I live. How do we defend bad searches? It's not in cases where nothing is found. It's in cases where the bloody body is found in a trunk and you got a murderer. We're going to just roll over and say, no, I'm not going to defend that guy? Isn't that where we also defend due process, right? There are wimpy defense attorneys out there who don't like to defend people who are accused of really bad crimes. I've taken over some of those cases from some of those defense attorneys. Why? Because that's where we make the stand for due process. The most vile, miserable, disgusting, everybody hates this person, let's take them down to the center of town and lynch them. That's the case where we stand up for due process. The hard ones. We defend them at the edges. Same is true for the Second Amendment. That the nice person with the really simple pea shooter firearm who's never done anything wrong in their life, keeps it in their home, that they have a firearm. That's nice. They ought to get to have a firearm. But I'm defending a person right now in Arizona who took his loaded AR-15 to Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix intentionally to make a stand about the Second Amendment, bought a coffee at Starbucks, and sat down to drink it peacefully. And he's being prosecuted. That's a statement at the edges. That's where we defend freedom. Don't be a freedom wimp. Are democracy and freedom the same thing? You guys know better than that, right? The government speaks of them, the people, the bosses in the government speak of democracy and freedom and democracy as if they're interchangeable. But they're not, are they? Are we faked out by this? Or are we able to think it through? I would say democracy and freedom are mostly incompatible, aren't they? Democracy is majority rule. Freedom is self-rule. Frankly, I don't care who's bossing me around. I don't want to be bossed around. And it doesn't make me feel any better that the majority of people got together to make the rule that they want to boss me around. I don't feel any better about that, whether it's the majority or an iron-fisted dictator. In fact, I can think of a few iron-fisted dictators I'd prefer to the majority of boobus Americanus, as Doug Casey just said. Do you feel any better that it's the majority of boobus Americanus that's bossing you around? I don't. I'd prefer an iron-fisted Ron Paul dictator or Doug Casey dictator or Butler Schaefer dictator. There are lots of other dictators I'd prefer than the majority of boobus Americanus. We should identify that. What's the problem with democracy? Everything's up for a vote today. I mean, there are things I would certainly vote on, but everything is up for a vote today. Our founding fathers never envisioned that. Indeed, that was the whole point of having the Constitution. It was to say this whole huge area of stuff, it's not up for a vote. It's off the table. We don't care what everybody thinks. The majority doesn't get to decide this issue. But today, anything is up for a vote. I find myself in endless discussions with people who say things like, well, Mark, the majority of the people want to do this or that, and they don't understand why I would be against something that the majority would be for. They don't understand the concepts of individual rights. That's where boobus Americanus is today. We should say this. And by the way, while I'm on the subject, sometimes I get aggravated by peace symbols. Do you get aggravated by peace symbols? Why would I be aggravated by peace symbols? I love peace. I'm a huge fan of peace. But you can't be for peace unless you're first for freedom. What am I talking about? Well, freedom is about not coercing your neighbor, not hitting your neighbor over the head and running their lives. How could you possibly support peace if you don't even get freedom? We haven't yet got to a free society. What are we even doing talking about peace? Peace is something in addition to freedom. By way of example, I think my neighbor and I could hate each other's guts. I could come out of my house every day and say bad things to my neighbor and say insults, and he could say insults back to me and, screw you and back and forth. As long as I don't trespass or initiate force against my neighbor, I'm a perfect pro-freedom guy. But are we living in peace? No, we're not living in peace. We don't even have freedom right now because many of my neighbors want to tell me what to do. Once we get to freedom, once my neighbor and I can agree, hey, how about this? I won't try to initiate force against you. You don't try to initiate force against me. Let's respect each other as human beings. Let's respect each other's right to run our own lives peacefully. Once we get there, now let's talk about love thy neighbor. Now let's talk about peace, where I walk outside my front door and see my neighbor and I say, hi, how are you? What can I do to help you today? How are things going for you? I'm a peace activist. Really, that's what I am, but I can't talk about peace because we haven't even got to freedom yet. When I see people wearing peace symbols, I scratch my head and I ask a couple of questions about freedom. How do you feel about the drug war? They don't even get freedom. I asked them, what are you doing wearing a peace symbol? You're still in favor of coercing your neighbors. You're nowhere near peace. I think that's a good way to start a discussion with people. I get into discussions with people just like that sometimes. Hey, I like your peace symbol. I see you're for peace. I assume you're for freedom, right? Well, what do you mean? Freedom? What does that have to do with peace? We should call them and not let them get away with this. And be gutsy about it. Don't be a wimp. It really shouldn't be a hard sell, right? I got to try to convince you that you ought to be in charge of you. I got to try to twist and contort your arguments and try to convince you that you ought to want to be in charge of yourself. I mean, are you willing to give up forcing other people into things to be in charge of yourself? Let's put it in those terms. We need to win hearts and minds. If we can't win hearts and minds, ain't nothing else matters. It's just the truth. I don't care who's running for office. I talk about running for office. I talked to Ron Paul about this. I don't know if some of you know I ran for U.S. Senate. As a Libertarian, 0% chance of getting in office and winning. I didn't really care about that. I cared about the fact that I got on a nationally televised debate and I got to ask questions, and I called Jeff Flake about his support for war and how many people are dead and how he bought into weapons of mass destruction and how many people are dead and how he feels about that. I got to ask questions. I got to try to get people to think a little bit. I used that as a platform to try to win hearts and minds. That's exactly what Ron Paul did. And that's a worthy endeavor for sure. Let's try to win hearts and minds. And again, we don't have to convince everybody, just enough. You know, my favorite new word is perspective. I think perspective is such a powerful thing. And to me, becoming wiser about life and living on the planet really means I have a better feel of the perspective of other people and how that may help them understand and view the world. I started thinking about a perspective a little bit. I had a couple of examples. My wife Tracy and I recently took a cruise to Alaska. First time I'd ever been there, and I thought to myself, what a humongous, humongous state. I mean, Alaska's big. I don't know if you've been there or not. We spent a lot of time going through Alaska. I don't think we saw 1% of Alaska. This is a big, big state. But I've also been listening to some of the things that are said by Stephen Hawking about the universe. From Stephen Hawking's perspective, Alaska is not so big. I mean, if you think about it, the Earth is just a speck of dust in a solar system with countless solar systems in our galaxy. And our galaxy is just a speck of dust and countless galaxies in the universe. From the Stephen Hawking perspective, Alaska's not so big. Can I say something controversial here? I always think, as long as Doug Casey's still walking around a free man, I'm safe. So I was glad to come on after Doug. Can we talk about methamphetamine for a moment? First of, just as a poll, who's for legalization of methamphetamine? All right, there's a few big boys and girls of freedom here. Let me say for all the children watching at home, for starters, I've never used methamphetamine, and I never will. I think it's a bad drug, and I would discourage anybody from using it, from trying it. I have met people in my life who used methamphetamine, and I'll do my best to talk them out of using it in the future. Nobody should use methamphetamine. That's my humble opinion. Also wrote an article, we may or may not have it here today, entitled Legalize Methamphetamine with an exclamation point. Could have been entitled, This is Why We Should End the Drug War. But I like creative titles. And if you can't get past my title, you're probably not open-minded enough to think about the issues. But I've had occasion, well, actually, let me back up. My article, do you know who criticized me about that article more than any other criticism I received? In this article, I got emails internationally about this article. The number one critic I got about my article was from the meth user. I got lots of emails from meth users. People who said, Mark, you overstated the dangerousness of meth. When I got the first one, I delete, okay. I probably responded because I'm like that. If you email me, I'll respond to you. So I probably said, well, thanks so much for your comment. Good luck with your life. I hope you get off this stuff. But I kept getting them from different people. People kept telling me, things like this. You know, I'm an over-the-road trucker, and I use meth all the time. I have for years. Never had a problem. Keeps me awake. I use small amounts of it. I started having clients coming in my office telling me I'm a social meth user. I'm married, I got kids, I got a full-time job, and I like to use some meth once in a while. So I've had occasion to talk to lots of meth users, and I've started engaging in conversations with them like, why do you use this stuff? Because my thought is, unless you want your teeth rotting out of your face and your skin peeling off and all that stuff the government says will happen to you. But what I've got back surprised me. Lots of them have said there's an upside. Who would have thought? There's an upside. There's some, I mean, it never dawned on me that there's an upside to using meth from the meth user. They told me they like this and they like that and they like the next thing. I've also had lots of meth users saying, you know something, Mark? I've been a meth user a long time. I'm around a lot of meth users. None of us have our teeth rotting out of our face or skin problems. Maybe if you used crazy amounts of it for years and years. I don't know the answer to that. But it dawned on me that if I want to understand the meth user, I should think about it from the perspective of the meth user. And I hadn't been doing that. The only thing I've been thinking about was what the government billboards, right? Use meth, look like this. But that's just not the situation. It allowed me to have a better understanding of meth. Again, still think it's a bad drug, still think it's going to do bad things, but I would add to that, if you can use it peacefully and you're a competent adult, it's not my decision to gauge what risks are appropriate for you. I mean, the same thing applies to skydiving, right? I'm not jumping out of a plane unless I expect it to be crashing in the next few minutes. That's just not my thing. It seems rather dangerous to me. But again, I'm not going to substitute my judgment for the judgment of another competent adult. I mean, that just seems obvious to me. So I want to tell you about this experience I had on this cruise. We left out of Vancouver, Canada, and there were lots of Canadians, lots of Australians, and lots of Americans on this cruise. And Tracy and I are sitting in the big ballroom one evening, and this guy comes out on stage with his violin. And he gave some story about he was born somewhere and raised somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. But he's happy to be an American, and he's getting ready to play America the Beautiful. And he says, who here is proud to be a Canadian? And lots of people said, yeah, proud to be a Canadian. And then he said, who here is proud to be an Australian? Man, I got to tell you, those Aussies, man, they seem fun. Because they went crazy. You know, it was like, woo, 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 Australia. You know, they went nuts. And then it was in, who here is proud to be an American? And it was kind of like that. And I just sat and I listened, and I was embarrassed, actually. You know, we were out of the country, and I'm an American, and I thought, wow, where are my fellow Americans who are proud to be an American? It was almost silent. And it really made me feel awful. And it started making me think about being a proud American and why so many Americans, if they are proud, they weren't proud enough on that occasion to cheer out and say, yes, I'm a proud American. So then this guy gets into this violin song, which I gotta say was beautiful. And it made me think, man, we're so good at singing songs about the free, land of the free, right? We're so good at talking about how we're the land of the free, and we're so horrible at walking the walk. Always left me very conflicted to talk about how we're the land of the free, at the same time we're the land of the incarcerated. We're the world champ at incarcerating other human beings, by far. Nobody's even close to us. So I'm thinking about all of this, and then what I thought was, to be a proud American to me is to really be proud of what America used to be about. The concepts that the founders had when they started our country. The things that Jefferson and John Adams, and especially Sam Adams, and the Sons of Liberty, you know, the things that they would say, and the great concepts of freedom, and this hugely noble experiment. I mean, indeed, I'm sure America, I'm thinking to myself, we were the undisputed freest place on the planet at the time of the American Revolution. And I'm thinking to myself, man, how can we get back to that again? We should get back to that. But then I thought, all my black brothers and sisters, our other fellow human beings, I bet they got a different perspective on this, right? We're talking about the wonderful land of the free after the American Revolution and all these great things said, but they're in chains. They're slaves. The people who are saying these things, most of them, maybe John Adams accepted, they're holding slaves. And as much as I like Thomas Jefferson and would love to talk to him, I'd like to just pull him aside privately and say, seriously, dude? You never freed your slaves? I mean, I understand it was illegal and all, but come on, man. You just overthrew the government by force. You just committed treason, and we love you for it. And you couldn't free your slaves even on your deathbed? What kind of a freedom guy are you? And I'm thinking about how the black community might have some angst, absolutely justified angst, about us singing songs about the land of the free, even talking about during the revolution. Yeah, it was a noble experiment, but it was flawed right from the beginning. In lots of ways, it was really flawed. But you know what? We know so much more now about freedom. We really do. I don't discount some of the intelligent things they were saying about the nature of government. They knew it wasn't a surprise to them that democracy was a problem, right? It was vile. They knew that. Jefferson said we should have a revolution maybe every 20 years. They knew some things, but we know so much more right now about freedom. I mean, we really could reboot the thing and have a much better chance of a truly free society because of how much more we know, how much further down the road we are. They couldn't even figure out slavery for other human beings was wrong. We're much further down the road than that, and it makes me really very optimistic. I wrote an article that didn't get published on some libertarian websites, and I thought this was sad because I said some positive things about police officers. Yeah, this is coming from Mark Victor, someone who's done criminal defense for 20 years, and I'm just telling you the truth. There are some really good police officers out there. There are some bad ones, and there are some good ones, like everything else. What a surprise, right? But in my article, I entitled it, Thomas Jefferson Corrected. I think he was wrong about something when he said that you have tyranny when the people fear the government and you have freedom when the government fears the people. I think he was wrong about that. I don't really think that that's a long-term plan. Freedom isn't based on fear. It's not. Good stuff isn't never based on fear. It's got to be based on respect and freedom and peace and, dare I say, love. We need to get to that. And I talk about a peace officer, you know, the one who they're looking for the bad guys, and a law enforcement officer, the ones who will scrupulously enforce every single little law. Well, in a free and just society, we don't need to make that distinction. In a truly free society, all the laws are consistent with libertarian principles. Yeah, I said it. If it's a crime, there's a trespass or a fraud. And I don't care about the law enforcement officer who enforces every single law. That's just fine with me. We don't need to make a distinction between a peace officer and a law enforcement officer. They're all good. Our problem is the law's messed up. Real fast, and I know my time is running out. There's lots of optimism all around us. There are reasons to be optimistic. I do lots of cruises. And every time I do cruises, I meet Serbs and I meet Croats. And I always have fun with them. I go up to the Serbs and I say, hey man, how do you feel about those Croats? Same thing with the Croats. Hey man, how do you feel about them Serbs? And of course I say it in a way that doesn't give away anything. And I always, 100% of the time, I get the same answer. Hey man, we're all cool. We realized that all that stuff is just the stupid government. It's just all politics. That we're all just people. We get along great. We love each other. They've 100% of the times I've asked that question on many, many cruises to many Croats and many Serbs. They figured it out. They made peace. Why can't we just do the same thing? Why can't we start valuing first freedom and then peace? I think we need to do that. Like the American Revolution, the Founding Fathers, those of us who have read what they wrote, what they had to say, we know that the American Revolution to them wasn't about violence. It really wasn't. It came to that, and indeed there was violence involved, but to a person, it was about a change in thinking. That was what the real American Revolution was about. It was a thought revolution. That's exactly what we need. Don't be afraid of making the argument for freedom. Be a big boy, a big girl of freedom. We can take back America. We can reboot. I think we can really move towards a free society. Maybe it's not sustainable forever, but it doesn't have to be, right? It just needs to be sustainable for a while, and maybe we can keep building on it. I would ask you to join me and join many others in this room, and let's help try to win more hearts and more minds for freedom. Thank you.